Today, we're counting down 3 East Side Seattle area places where a $1.1 million budget lines up in very different ways. And the number one pick may not be the first place most people guess. When people say the East Side around Seattle, they often jump straight to Bellevue, Kirkland, or Redmond. But once the budget is fixed at $1.1 million, the conversation gets more interesting. The question becomes less about chasing the best-known names and more about where that price point actually sits compared with the local market. So for this countdown, we're looking at 3 cities east and northeast of Seattle, where $1.1 million tells a different story in each place. Right on target, above the recent median, or meaningfully above the typical home value. Coming in at number 3, Snoqualmie. Snoqualmie sits about 28 miles east of Seattle and is closely tied to one of the region's most recognizable landmarks, Snoqualmie Falls. For buyers using a $1.1 million budget as the reference point, this one is almost directly on the mark. Redfin, in 2026, puts the recent median sale price at about $1,100,000, while Zillow, in 2026, shows a typical home value of $1,129,059. That makes Snoqualmie the closest bullseye, where the budget is not far below the typical value and lines up closely with recent sales activity. The setting is a major part of the identity here, with the falls, the surrounding foothills, and the city's location farther east, giving it a noticeably different feel from the denser east side suburbs closer to Lake Washington. Snoqualmie is also the kind of place where the geography is hard to separate from the housing conversation. You are not just talking about a city name on a map. You are talking about a place next to a major waterfall, set along the route toward the Cascade foothills, with a more open, outdoors-oriented backdrop than the inner east side. That matters because a $1.1 million budget here is not being compared against downtown Bellevue towers or lakeside Kirkland streets. It is being measured against a market where the local benchmark is already sitting right around that number. So, Snoqualmie earns the number 3 spot because it answers the question very cleanly. If the budget is $1.1 million, this is one of the East Side area places where that number sits extremely close to the center of the market. At number 2, Bothell. Bothell stretches across King and Snohomish counties, which gives it a broader regional role than a lot of single neighborhood picks around Seattle. The price story is different from Snoqualmie. Redfin in 2026 puts Bothell's recent median sale price at about $999,000, and Zillow in 2026 shows a typical home value of $951,587. Against those benchmarks, a $1.1 million budget lands above the typical Bothell home rather than right at the line. That is why Bothell moves ahead. The same budget has a little more room relative to the local numbers. Bothell also benefits from its position in the greater Seattle map. It is not as far east as Snoqualmie or North Bend, and it connects into the northern east side orbit, while also touching Snohomish County. That geography gives Bothell a different kind of flexibility. It is still part of the Seattle area's suburban conversation, but it is not priced exactly like the most central east side names. The city has a long-established downtown area, a mix of residential pockets, and access to the broader North End job and shopping corridors without needing to be framed as one single neighborhood. For a buyer comparing $1.1 million across the east side and nearby suburbs, Bothell stands out because the budget sits above the typical value, while still keeping the location connected to both the east and north sides of the metro area. And now, number 1, North Bend. North Bend is on the outskirts of the Seattle metropolitan area in King County, and it sits farther east, with the Cascade foothills becoming a defining part of the setting. Zillow, in 2026, shows a typical home value of $933,616, which means a $1.1 million budget sits clearly above the typical North Bend home. That gap is the reason North Bend takes the top spot here. Among these 3, the budget stretches the most relative to the typical home value. North Bend also had a population of 7,461 at the 2020 census, giving it a smaller city scale compared with larger suburban names closer to Seattle. North Bend is the pick that gives this countdown its twist. A lot of people thinking about the east side start with the places closest to Bellevue or the Lake Washington corridor. But North Bend changes the frame. Here, the trade-off is about moving farther toward the foothills and looking at a market where the typical value, according to Zillow in 2026, sits below the $1.1 million budget by a meaningful amount. The city's identity is tied to its location on the edge of the metro area, with mountain views, outdoor access, and a more pronounced gateway to the Cascades feel. So, while it may not be the first name that comes up in every East Side housing conversation, it makes a very strong case when the question is specifically where $1.1 million goes farther. So, the countdown is Snoqualmie at number 3, Bothell at number 2, and North Bend taking the top spot. Snoqualmie is the near bullseye for a $1.1 million budget. Bothell puts that budget above the local typical value, and North Bend is where that number stretches the most among these three. And yes, that number one pick really does shift the way this East Side conversation looks once you move beyond the most expected names. What did we miss? Which East Side or Greater Seattle area neighborhood would have made your personal top 3 for a $1.1 million budget? If you think we ranked one of these too high or too low, drop your take and tell us which specific city, neighborhood, or pocket you would have included instead. If this breakdown helped, tap the like button and subscribe for more Seattle neighborhood deep dives. And let us know what you want next. Another price point countdown, a specific suburb spotlight, or a deeper look at one Seattle area neighborhood.